The information contained within this podcast is general in nature and should not be construed as advice nor substituted for qualified professional counseling or mental health therapies. If you are genuinely in need of deeper assistance, please seek the advice of qualified professionals. Welcome to the Unpacking Grief podcast with Drew Marriott and myself, Ian P.F. McDonald. Join us as we delve into what grief is, how it can differ for each of us, and how we can explore techniques for healing and growing to help both you and those around you in processing grief. Hi, and welcome back to Unpacking Grief podcast with myself, Ian P.F. McDonald.
And Drew Marish. How are you, buddy?
I'm good, man. It's always good to see you.
Same here. Wow. So we got our first episode recorded. We got to look at it earlier today. And I did want to say a few things. I hope that the audience will get to know us more and more each week. Authenticity was always a big theme, and we want to honor that in each other and just say that, what you're watching is a work in progress. It's being produced literally with love and compassion for the listeners and the folks out there who are living through grief. So I wanted to just be mindful and mention that.
And on that note, we have actually just moved across to the Anchor platform for podcasts. And there is actually a facility there for people to leave us a voice message. So if you are going through something and you'd like to connect, or if you'd like to, I'll just leave it open, because sometimes you feel called to reach out to people. And if you're feeling called, jump onto our Anchor homepage and reach out to Drew or myself or both of us, because we would actually like to know what people are going through and what works for them. Because, as you said, it is a process, right, Drew?
Absolutely. Yes. It's very personal, very specific to each individual. So with the first episode, I did mention there was just taking on a bunch of information and just trying to occupy my mind and really search out information that could help me. And one of the things that I learned is in terms of healing on multiple dimensions, a lot of folks just say, they hit it all together and bundle and say, well, I have grief and now I have to deal with it. And how do I go about doing that? And one of the ways that worked for me was learning that they're on three dimensions, and I look at them in order, emotionally, certainly, right? Because when that grief is introduced in that moment, that's all you feel is that visceral emotional reaction. And it's ushered in its sorrow, it's extreme sorrow and grief. It could also be tempered with some inappropriate emotions as well. I will say in my case, yes.
Can I tell me more about inappropriate? Because that's a really interesting point you made, is perceivably inappropriate, but when they come organically like that, at a level they might be appropriate as well, right?
Yeah. It's a thought process, and for me, having thinking back to the last time I saw my son, early in the morning, not everyone's a morning person. We were just kind of doing our thing, being boys, and he was on his way out the door, and unfortunately, we had some words, nothing too intense, but he was having a rough start to his day, and certainly I understood that, and he took off on his bike, and nothing that dramatic that I think it would have affected his performance and stuff. But having had that exchange and have that be the last, and not have it be the interaction with your son that you would want, it was trying for a while. So I decided to play the game where I heaped a lot of guilt on myself, and that potentially I affected his mood, and perhaps I had a hand in some way what happened. So that, when it came to learn over time, and it didn't take too long, I didn't beat myself up over it for too long, but guilt is really easy to slip into, not just with the incident, but also through your process, feeling guilty if you may not be responding a certain way, or if you don't feel that you're in your grief the way you should, contextually.
Can I ask you about that? Because my dog was run over because we live on a very small street. For those who missed episode 1, my little boy that I lost was a dog, so it's a completely different experience, but my bond with him was special in my way. And as you're saying this, he was off leash. We have a very small street. Everyone on the street knows each other. We have each other's numbers. It's a very small street, and we know every car that comes up here. And, I listened as I came down the stairs that day. The dog wasn't on a leash, because I had such a familiarity with the street, and we are literally one street from the, one or two houses from the end here. And it's a single lane, which means that, like, if two cars come, they have to struggle to get through. And I don't know if I'm through exactly what you're talking about, where that couldn't have happened if he was on a leash,
Mm-hmm.
And
or
yeah,
you don't know that.
No, and as we talked as well about Zach, we maybe have these exit points, and like you're saying, like if it wasn't that, maybe it would have been something else. But I still blame myself, and it's not conscious, but it's there. So I just wanted to relate to you on that because I know it.
Yeah, and part of that, part of reconciling that piece for me was surrender and recognizing that my approach and my interactions with him, and despite what I knew, for all intents and purposes, I could have put sand in his gas tank. I could have sabotaged something that he was falling in love with, and I could never do that to him. To see his smile when he came into the house after a day of riding in the sun and with his friends, and there was an element of pride that I'd never seen before, and would never want to diminish. But once I came to realize that I had surrendered and I let go, and I was at peace with whatever was going to unfold, I think that from my standpoint, allowed his passing to unfold, and this is deep and maybe hard to get your head around, unfold in the most beautiful way possible. Think about it. He's going down a busy 4-lane road. He was the only vehicle involved. It was a one vehicle accident with no other collateral damage to him or others. The fact that, again, somebody was there that was able to pray over him and be with him and do his part in those moments was big for me. So that helped me really resolve that piece, just knowing that I allowed him to live his life and do what he was called to do, despite all of my hesitations. So there's anger. Anger comes into play, and a lot of, anger with the bike. There's anger from other people who don't quite understand. They want to be angry at something. They blame the bike. Again, I can't tell people how to react. Just in my case, again, it was a progression over time where I wasn't quite there to say it was the bike's fault, but the images and his videos that he took on his GoPro, it took some time before I can actually sit back, breathe, and go into that.
Do you mean watching the crash?
Not watching the crash, but watching some of his video. Like, he documented everything, like his little test rides and when he was tuning up the bike, and he'd come back and talk through, he'd change the brakes, and he videotaped it and talked through it. So stuff like that. And folks just sometimes in their processing of grief need to be angry at something. And then fear. Just a matter of what that triggers within you in terms of your other close bonds and relationships, and the fear of loss. So
I'd love to dig into some of these themes. Like, you've mentioned so many themes, and they're all a topic of discussion all on their own. The redirected anger or misdirected anger, which is blame. We have
Hmm.
a unique society nowadays where blame is way too prevalent, and it shows up in a noticeable fashion in this kind of incident. What was the learning for you? I know what my learnings are. Like for me, I blame me, but how did blame, I guess, what was the interaction with blame, both outwards and inwards, giving and receiving?
Again, it's for me and maybe for you, it's anecdotal, but it was coming to terms with, when you go through something and you blame somebody else, that's one part of growth. Then when you look at that same situation and you blame yourself, you take that on, right? That's a growth where you're not pointing the finger, you're taking accountability for this fault and for these feelings. And then there's the last, right, which is the most optimal, and that's it's nobody's fault. It's truly nobody's fault. This unfortunate accident was not his fault, was not the bike's fault, was not mine. And that was a very compelling realization for me that kind of helped to take the next step of processing in the dimensions of healing, psychologically. Once I isolate the emotion, now I approach it and tactically and how to resolve it.
Were there any, I know that there's surprises in what we go through. A lot of what we go through is very unexpected when it's so large as this, but were there any surprises, without making it sound like anyone did anything wrong, but from the periphery, from the crowd, from the, audience at large, the other people who knew Zach, were there any ways of processing which struck you as unusual or made you feel uncomfortable that were really, they made it more difficult than made it easier? I know a lot of people try and help, but sometimes the way that they approach can be very interesting. We all have very different worldviews, and at times like this they become very apparent because what is endeavoring to help can sometimes be received as, where are you at that you think that would help? Do you know what I mean? And there's that translation you have to make sometimes.
So leveling that field, I was fortunate to not encounter that much at all.
Good.
There was perception that, people would make heartfelt comments when I would post his pictures. And when I got around to posting his videos of the motorcycle, his photos in his leather jacket and his helmet on and the big smile, I was mindful of the triggers to the audience that other people weren't where I was at. And that goes back to what I was saying before in terms of competition. I don't sit here and think I corner the market on the grief and loss of my son. He had so many relationships, and somebody may be struggling in processing that. Certain aspects of it. But yeah, there were photos that I posted and folks would comment, oh, the bike. And that would be it. I don't think they had much insight to the behind the scenes, how it developed. It's just one day you ended up with a bike and that was pretty much, that was it. So
I've been riding, technically since I was 7 years old was the first time I rode my motorcycle by myself, and it was a friend's Pee-wee 50 dirt bike in the backyard, and ever since it's been a sheer passion. So I get where he was at and what it does for you. It gives you a sense of identity when you get that love. But the thing that I've heard the most as a rider is exactly the things that you're hearing about the bike and saying, it's not something that I think anyone doesn't know when they get on the bike. most of us, when we have these moments, we get up and walk away embarrassed, and it's heartbreaking to see that that wasn't the case for Zach, because, learnings should be learnings, and on a bike, they're real learnings. They kick your ass. You learn it once and you don't do it again, because usually you realize the severity, and, he went straight to 11 on that meter. And when it comes to how you connect with your son, for those who don't know us, we both sort of work in the realms of, I guess, energy and spirituality when it comes to who we are as people. We're both very spiritually minded, not necessarily denominational for me. Is it for you? No?
No, those are things that, kind of broke down over the time. I identify proudly as a Byzantine Catholic. I wear a cross from communion, but as it plays out in the day-to-day, I'm at a different...
Yeah, and the more I research into who Yeshua or Jesus was, the more I realize that all of the religions are basically just, following a different version of the exact same person. So it's really all one. But the more I dig into that, the more I start to see that the other side is there. It absolutely is, that there are guides around us, and science will never be able to prove it. So the scientific-minded listening might be like, "Oh, I don't believe in that." And you're right, because we will never be able to prove it, apparently, because it's undetectable to science. It's non-physical. But if any of you out there do believe in that, going through this process, going through what I've gone through this last 2 years, there absolutely is another side, and they are there, and it is a lot less suffering than we have here. And I know you've had experiences with that, Drew, where rather immediately afterwards, you told me you could sense him really quite soon.
Yes. We did do a medium session early on, probably a month or so after, and as was explained to me, the younger male souls tend to come through stronger. And the time that we spent together in that hour, I heard everything that I needed to hear. It kind of married with everything that I had independently found out, at Ground Zero and other stories that I had heard. Just so many different connections. His best friend, our neighbor down the street, a friend of his was the EMT who responded at the scene and was able to give Kevin his own assurances that, what he found and how it played out was in his best interest, in terms of how medically he found him and how they were able to get him. They were there within minutes and got him off to the hospital, but it seemed bleak to him as the EMT early on. So, but there were things that were shared with us, and unfortunately, it's a slippery slope when you submit to that side of things and mediumistic and connecting with loved ones, and it's scary for people, and I don't blame them. It's not for everyone. I wouldn't encourage anyone to do it who wasn't fully prepared to go through that experience. But for me...
And cold to it as well. If you're not feeling cold to it, be honest with yourself about that.
Yeah. There may never come a time where you decide to, use other tools. And it's not to say that your loved one, I was told, again, something very powerful with a thought. Your mother, your father, my son are with us. And the medium, explained the scene of his celebration of life, and picked out just some details. And not that I needed those things to believe. I went in open heart, but it gave me everything I needed. So I picked up everything that was behind me, brought it forward, got my footing, and then continued to push ahead. And even to when I think your interaction with me, when you shared that just kind of impromptu, we were on FaceTime in my kitchen here, And when you said that you saw Zachary behind me on the steps and felt him, I mean, I remember your face. I mean, you clutched your chest and you shared some pretty interesting guidance from him.
Yeah, it's a unique feeling. I feel like, in my belief, and again, I'm only speaking from this body as this soul, and I have no idea what other people's experience are. But, I always believe that everyone can do this. If we have the willingness, if we have the dedication and the ability to really lean into love, because love is absolutely the underpinning energy of all of this. It's really the building blocks of what we are. And in a world like we live right now, it's really easy to forget love. And when we talk love, usually we think of Disney princesses and Rapunzel hair coming down towers and all that sort of, forgive me,
Romanticized.
Yeah. It's
commercialized.
It's essentially a guised form of lust, youthful lust. And then, oh my God, I can have him. And like, there's this. We'll be together forever. Fairy tale romantic love. But when we're really talking about love, it's that unconditional love that I hear you have or had or still have for Zach, which is, this bike. Yeah, it scared you, but you're like, I can't take that smile off his face. I can't impose any resistance here. This kid is like loving this, and it's making him into a man. And that connection with unconditional love, if anyone out there is in their own bereavement and is wondering if they can make that connection as one medium to a potential other, that means you, everyone out there, there's a little exercise that I do to get people into their heart space, and it's really simple. And can I do it with you now, Drew, and then people at home?
Yes, absolutely. We've done it before, and I'll be a willing participant.
Cool. So don't skip ahead and just give the answer. So how you doing?
I'm great.
Yeah, good. So if you are listening at home, whatever you answered, that's the correct answer. It's absolutely correct. But that answer typically comes from our intellect. It comes from our brain. It even actually comes from our habituated responses. That's why we say the same thing every time. I'm great, I'm great, I'm great, or whatever it is for us. It's not actually a truthful answer. And the truthful answer won't come from those places. It'll come from your heart. So everyone, if you want to jump in on this one, because it will connect you, so you will be able to start to hear the whispers and feel their thoughts, feel their messages coming through to you. There you go. So relax into it. Take that big deep breath. Close your eyes. I want you to ask yourself, don't say it out loud, but I want you to ask yourself honestly and vulnerably what your heart truly, truly feels in your heart. So as you settle into that moment, I know for me, it was actually a little bit of a surprise that all of my sadness about Teddy, my little dog, my little boy, presented itself. That's what came through for me in this moment. What came for you?
Fullness. Feeling full. Love.
I love that.
Connected.
Seems like you're here for me more than I'm here for you now. 2 years later, after the trauma that started my little...
Wow. No coincidences. That's for sure.
And I feel fraudulent at times. I got to say, like, there's that imposter syndrome where you've lost your son, and then I have a trauma which is a dog. And sometimes in the world, people be like, "You don't know what parenthood is like. It's just a dog." And I'm in agreement with that. I don't have a human baby. There's a lot more intricacy and communication and interaction in other ways. But when it comes to a dog, they're like the ultimate teachers of unconditional love. And that dog was my first experience of that. So, he was, no matter what happened, he was always like, let's go do something fun, And I haven't had many friends like that in my life, They get down like the rest of us, so...
That's for sure.
I just wanted to share that quick one because if anyone is listening to this podcast because it's found its way to you, been called to you, or you it, and you are wondering if your loved ones are there, I can guarantee you they absolutely are. The veil is thin, but it's also made up of your belief in your ability to be able to hear them and being in your heart space. So do everything you can to take deep breaths, meditate, get into your heart space. I know you've had a lot of success with meditation, Drew.
I do a lot of different things and experiment. I find in my normal waking moments, I just sink into a meditative state, without much preparation. It's not always the sit on the floor, legs crossed, pillows, that sort of thing. And you did also, with your exercise, there was another piece to it that I remember where there was the elevator, that when we were starting, you were also visualizing that elevator, being in that elevator and going down and physically experiencing from the heart how you felt.
Absolutely.
So,
and for anyone at home, whatever metaphor works for you, to that thought process that most of us hear, it's all head. It's all cerebral. So if you're hearing the voices and the thoughts like you always do every day, because we've been trained that way through school and society, just think, all right, well, what is the very, very quiet whisper of the heart is? And whether it's an elevator, fireman's pole, whatever needs to slide you down to that heart space,
right.
Just sink into it. And as I think it's Dr. Joe Dispenza who says this, he goes, when you ask your heart, it always answers concisely and in a really short response. If it can do it in a one-word response, it will. It doesn't mess around. It gets straight to the point because it knows how it feels, and that's who you truly are. Is that little spark in there that really knows everything about you. The brain is giving you all the confusion, stress, and lies. So.
Oh yeah. I would say that there's a story that I'm not sure I even got to share with you, but in that medium, that quick riff that we had, Zachary's message for me was, you may or may not remember it, was, you saw us taking a trip, my wife and I. That wasn't my wife at the time, but it was 2-3 hours, and you went northwest. And Zach said, take the girl and make it special. And I had shared with you that I had already the previous day made reservations to go away just for the weekend, just 2-3 days, do some hiking at the Ricketts Glen. It's a state park near us with a lot of waterfalls, and so it was a nice drive, a nice place in the lake, and it had a theater. So I purchased some of her favorite snacks, and that was the making it special in my mind. But what I didn't know was going to happen, that when I allowed my heart to just kind of take over, we had a quiet, hour or so just on the dock after our day of hiking and before a session with Scott Tajarian on our synastry. And I was just overcome with this feeling, and I spun around, no ring, and got on a knee and told her that I told my wife that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. And it was met with much enthusiasm and fanfare and mutual feelings. But the interesting thing was, her and I met in kindergarten. We were in grade school together, and then I left our high school early, and we hadn't seen each other in 35 years. Come to find out that when Scott did as a gift to me when Zach passed, he did a parent-child reading for me. So he has now my chart, Zach's chart, Deanna's chart, and comparing Deanna's chart and Zach's chart, they share the same primal triad.
That's the sun, the moon, and the
ascendant.
Yeah.
And mathematically, odds-wise, the chances of that are not astronomical. It's about 1 in 1,024. The statisticians can check my work on that. But the mind-blowing thing was they were 1 degree off on the sun. They were one exact on the moon. Wow. And they were just a few degrees off on the ascendant. And the odds of that were 1 in literally tens of millions.
So for the listeners, we should actually also state, how did she come back into your life?
We had reconnected on Facebook, as everyone does, it seems.
Is this after Zach?
No, the year before, we were each different timelines, and when news, got out, and I shared with my social network and stuff. Deanna was one who just seemed to get it right in terms of what to say, when to say it. It was very genuine, and again, having not seen her in 35 years, it was a pretty big deal to me. And so when we saw each other again, it clicked. She she gave me she was very gentle. She just and when I sit before you and I sit with the audience and try and explain these aspects of my healing, the last thing I want to say or can say in good conscience is that I did this on my own. We never do it alone. I would hope that you don't do it on your own. Deanna came at a time, and I am firmly convinced that, again, the spiritual and a miracle gift from my son, that he set his soul, basically soul twin, to kind of come and look after me in his absence. So
I think it also speaks volumes about your ability to recognize that guidance.
I mean, miracles are there for everyone. That's one example of my miracle. But the signs and all of the books and, the cardinals, the pennies, they're very specific to everyone. And sometimes they're just not paying attention. So while you're healing, pay attention.
Yeah.
Ask for something.
Read Laura Lynn Jackson's book, Signs, by the way?
I have. You have.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful gift. And I loved it. And I passed it on to someone else.
Fantastic. Good. That's the thing to do. I mean, someone like you, I knew you'd read it and be like, I already kind of knew this.
It doesn't hurt to go back and you only know what you know. And when you come at things at different angles, or at different times where you're at, in your process, you do have an ability to maybe call out a few things that you did not see before. It's just an ongoing process. It's not one that is certainly manic. You go through your days and you deal with whatever emotions come. So honor those emotions, whatever they are. There was a saying that it's okay if you laugh more than you cry on any given day. And I want to encourage people to try and allow themselves to, you can be happy, you can, those moments, and just honor yourself.
Nice. All right. Well, great place to wrap it up. Thanks for your time. Hopefully some of you out there listening are getting a lot out of this. I know that, having people like Drew and myself, we both have shown up for each other in different ways. This is an important part of this process, and never forget. And if we're a part of that process, we're very grateful to have been able to be found by you, and maybe share us to your friends if they're also in the same place. I'm Ian McDonald.
Drew Marish here.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us on Unpacking Grief. If this podcast is helpful to you, then please subscribe and consider helping others to find us by rating us 5 stars on your podcast platform of choice and by sharing us with your friends and family directly. You can contact us and keep up to date on Instagram at UnpackGriefPod. If you'd prefer, video versions of all episodes are available on Spotify and YouTube. And if you have any questions, suggestions, or would like to find any of our recommendations, you can do so on our website, unpackinggriefpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.